First things first, let's go ahead and sort out the leaders. S tier, Purple Kaido, not much to say. You know, pretty strong effect, cheats out life, can kill you out of nowhere. I'll have a deck profile out on this one soon. Next, we got the Blurple Kaido, and gonna consider it not yet good. Multicolored decks naturally get better as the game edges because their card pool doubles, right? But the biggest drawback here is the less one life, which means mistakes are highly unforgiving, and you have to play perfectly to win the game. Monocolored leaders just have more room for error and risks as they all have an extra life, such like Purple Kaido. So having an extra life also means you get one extra card because you take a life. And yeah, if I come up with the profile of this one, I'll go ahead and make it. But I really like this Blurple leader. It's just really hard to play right now. Blurple Croc, kind of same thoughts as Blurple Kaido. King, feel free to recycle this guy if you pull him, unless you pull the all art version, of course. He's just like a worse version of the Zoro leader. There's just really not a big reason to play him over any of these. I'd rather play any of these over King. So I think the next thing we'll go ahead and sort out here is the trash tier stuff, the recycle stuff, the things you don't really want. So leading the trash tier, recycle tier, we can have Urashima here. It's pretty unnecessary. There's better things to play for 7 costs. Stat wise, the 6 Kai's Fukurojo is better because 8K is generally more than enough, and then even then, between the 8 and the 5, they're all better picks than this one. The next one that probably belong in this trash tier would probably be this Jack. So you aren't really gonna play Jack over Onigashima on turn 2, and after that he doesn't do anything in your hand. Unlike Sasaki, who's a 2K counter that also ramps. In this case, you're just paying 1 for them to pitch a card, but they have that choice, right? So it's also a slower version of the 5 costs Drake. Who here? He's a 4/6. Again, it's better to play the 5/7. Maybe there is some value of the 4/6 if you're going second, so it's live. But on your second turn, if you're going second, you kind of want to play the Onigashima or any other card that ramps. So for right now, cards going in this pile. Next one, going into this recycle tier, speed. Not much to say. It's just weak. Trigger doesn't matter. You know, just a 1K counter. Let's see. Next one. Let's see. Who's who here? Not much to say. If you have 8 more Dawn on the field, this character gains 1,000 power. So basically what this card is telling you is to play it late game. But it's a 2-cost 3K when I could just play my 2-cost blockers instead. So yeah, this probably not that great. I'll put the 4/5 Maria in this tier. You just have better blocker options between the 5-cost Queen and then the 2-cost blockers. Yeah, she's 4/5, but her effect is pretty much non-existent, and it costs too much for her stats. 4/5 again. Best case scenario, you go second, you play her on turn 2, but now you're fighting with your ramp. So yeah, she's just gonna stay there. Let's take a look. Probably next one I'd put on here is Hold'em. So on KO, add 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck to your cost area rested. Interesting. It becomes a free beater because they're not gonna want to commit cards to kill it, but then that means you also never get the effect. So it's just a 3/4 beater, which you have to waste 1 Dawn per turn to use. So, and it's only 1K counter, and it's a 3. So again, it's fighting with your ramp slots. So again, just tossing it. Next one that we'll put on this list, let's let's see. Probably Sheep's Horn. So, Dawn -1. Rest one of your opponent's characters with a cost 6 or less. It's kind of like a worse straw sword from the green deck. There's really not much to use this on. You're finding a lot of slots. It doesn't have a trigger. It costs 2, and if there's something that has 6 or less that is a problem, it's nothing that Kaido can't handle. So next card to go on this recycle list, probably, let's see, probably Ulti Meteor. One costs Dawn -2, so in reality it costs Dawn, let's see, so you're at 1, you're at -2, so it really costs more than 1. So, and you only gain 2,000, and like, yeah, you get to draw a card, but then its trigger is just ramp 1 when there's other ramp 1 options in this deck right now. Next card that can belong here is, let's see, the 7 cost Kaido. So yeah, 7 costs 8, activate main, -2. It gains banish for the turn. Yeah, that's it. It's just a 7/8 beater. You get -2 to banish, but there's way better cards to play. It doesn't even have a counter value. Like, it's just, yeah, this is one of the worst promo cards. Let's see, another card, Structure Deck Sasaki. This is whack. Dawn -1, draw 1 card. It's a bootleg queen, basically, without block. So, and you're also negging yourself, and of course it conflicts with your ramp. So, not a good card. Next one we can go through, Vanilla from the structure deck, and let's see, there's another Vanilla from the structure deck. So, these are pretty much all the cards that you can go ahead and get rid of if you see them. Or you can just keep them as common bulk if you want. But they probably won't see play. Now we can go ahead and go to the not yet good tier. First one going down the list, I would consider Kurozumi Semimaru. Kurozumi type characters other than himself cannot be KO'd in battle. So the logic behind this is you have him and this Kurozumi blocker up. And what happens is you block with him, but it doesn't die. But with the current deck building limitations, this card's not good just because you can't draw both of them. And he doesn't do anything outside of being a 1k counter. Maybe whenever we get searchers, if this deck gets searchers, kind of like how green has Bonnie, then, maybe this could be a viable tactic. But right now, it's pretty underwhelming. Or maybe if it has a big Kurozumi beat stick, then maybe this card could be good. But other than that, it won't be seeing much play right now. So next card going down the list is, let's see, probably Bao Huang. So not a great card. Maybe when future cards come out, it could be good. Even at this card's best, for example, if they only have 2 cards in hand, you can't really do anything with that information, because if you were scared of counters, you would assume they were counters already. And if you were scared of the next play, for example, let's say you're playing a mirror and you were scared of a 10 cost Kaido, all this does is play into the 10 cost Kaido. You would just play around the 10 cost Kaido if you assumed they had it anyway. Of course, this example is matchup dependent, but it's just not a really good use of 2 Dawn. I'd rather just play the blocker. Let's see, next card that we can go through is, how about this guy, Kamazo the Manslayer. So KO, Dawn -1, KO one of your opponent's cost, 5 or less. So this is kind of like a better Hold'em because it's 4/5, so it can swing for free every turn, and they're not gonna kill it. But the thing is, so you can be more aggressive with this card. It's just, it's a 4/5 vanilla that can't die basically, but it's fighting for a lot of slots on your 4 cost. So right now I don't have a current way of how to quote unquote break the card, but I think it's pretty close. So let's go to the next one. Page one. Not yet good yet. So Dawn -1, and you can swing at active characters during the turn. Again, uh, it'll probably be pretty matchup dependent, and it'll it'll probably develop depending on what kind of meta there is, or if there's like an oppressive card that doesn't need to rest to use its effects, or something like that. But it's an interesting card, 4/5, but right now probably won't see a lot of play. Next card that's not quite good yet. Have to go with the Artificial Devil Fruit Smile. So 2 costs, look at the top 5, reveal 1 smile character with 3 or less added to your hand. So it's not good yet because maybe in a vanilla turbo type purple deck right now, but in the future when they release more card pools, and yeah, this can get way better. And it's also searchable via Orochi, so it has the potential. The card pool just doesn't exist yet. Let's see. Next card that's probably not yet good or has potential, I would say they cost promo Kaido. So it's basically an 8 cost 9 vanilla. The ramp kind of doesn't really matter since you play this, you were probably at max Dawn Curve anyway. And to be able to freely play this card in a turn means that the opponent didn't have anything threatening on the board that needed to be answered with a king or another Kaido, or needed to be defended with queen. It does have a useful effect, always making your board breath live, but it seems kind of win more to me currently. It's still a scary beat stick though. Some neat stuff you can do with it is you can probably burn more than once per game since you're ramping a lot if you have the Onigashima also. But yeah, so that's the not yet good tier. Now moving on to the B tier level of cards, we can go ahead and start with Ulti here. She's okay. She ramps. There's kind of better options to ramp. Her stats aren't that great, 2-3, and on top of that, she doesn't even have a counter value. So probably wouldn't play her, but she's okay. She does stuff. Next one, I'd say that's kind of an okay card. A little overlooked is this the 6 cost queen. So this one's kind of an interesting card. Dawn -1. This character gains rush. Then give your opponent's character -2. Right? So it's the only rush option this deck has, but then when you compare it to a card like Rush Zoro, which is 3 cost 5 for rush, Queen just feels kind of understated. But it's an interesting card to think about just because it has rush. Next card in this tier, probably Orochi. 2k counter. That's all you really need to know. If you really want to flood your deck with 2k counters, then go ahead, throw them in there. Next card that probably belongs on this tier, we'll go ahead and throw Babanuki in there. 5 costs, 7 attack, pretty standard vanilla, 1k counter. It's alright. Probably wouldn't run more than 2 in a deck. And going alongside him would be the Fukuroju, 6-8, kind of same thing. Thinking about it now, Babanuki's probably better since it's 5-7. This one's 6-8, but they both kind of get blown up by Kaido anyway. And honestly, playing this a turn earlier is pretty good. So yeah. Next card, probably put Elephant's Marchu in this category here. It's a pretty decent card. KO, basically KO a blocker, and then add 1 Dawn. So, kill a blocker, ramp 1, cost 4, kind of awkward, but it's a Saki trigger. It can work. it'll be hard to find space because the deck just has a lot of cards that you need to play over it. But it's an option. It's an option. So next one probably be structure deck ulti. Same thoughts as Orochi, but this one's a 4/5, so there might be a there might come a turn where you need to summon this because it can be a beat stick. So it just has that extra option. So it's a little bit better than Orochi. So you would only throw Orochi in if you already have the other 2K counters in the deck. Let's see. Next one, moving on. Let's see. Next one I would probably rank here is Structure Deck Drake. Basically, another vanilla. Nothing crazy here, but it's 3/5, so it's a little bit different. You can play it earlier, and it being 5, it can threaten life pretty early. So it's a decent vanilla, but probably the 5/7 is better just because of the fact that again you're fighting with your ramp turn, right? Turn 2, you want to ramp. So that's the only thing that I wouldn't put this in, unless you're trying to get some early aggression going on. But otherwise, I would just play for the ramp. Let's see. Next card. Probably here's the disasters, right? Interesting card. Cost 4, draw 1, then add 1 Dawn to your ramp 1. But in this case, it does have an interesting trigger. There's not a lot of draw cards in this deck, and what you want to be doing is like drawing your blockers. So having this, if you draw this and you don't get to play it, then ideally you'll just pitch it with the 5-cost queen. So it's not that bad. It's interesting. It's another ramp option. So I'm putting it over here because it has some utility. So next, I'll probably put Brachio Bomber in the same. The events are kind of interesting. I think Brachio Bomber should see some slots in your deck just because it removes problem 6 costs or less. So if you're thinking about like the green matchup, right, it'll kill the Hawkins immediately. Or if you don't feel like dealing with Luffy in the red matchup, you'll just kill it and then you'll get to ramp 1, and then having an extra Dawn up to use, your Blast Breath, or, getting an extra Dawn that you need to play a blocker is pretty useful. And, of course, trigger, ramp 1. Pretty solid card. Now, let's start looking at the pretty good cards. These are basically the cards are the reason why you're going to want to run purple. Let's go ahead and start this off with the 10-cost Kaido. On paper, it's an amazing card, but in reality, it requires a lot of setup, and you can't play it into every situation. It helps in the green matchup and the law matchup and the blue matchup, but to be honest, if the mid game goes correctly, King, the 6-cost and the 7-cost King, is already good form of removal on top of having the 9-cost Kaido, right? So I guess in theory you can make an argument that you should never get to a point where you need to use this effect, but having it as a 10-12 beater is also really good. But the thing is, not every situation is ideal, so you have to run this in those situations where you kind of do need it. So the maximum value of playing this card is playing it into a huge board, right? But if you're playing it into a full board, there was already probably a chance that you were losing that game simply because they had so much board presence on you. So you're playing this when you have a low life count. And for example, you can't play this card when you have no life. So, or if you're playing against Kid, you can't play this card if you have 1 life. And the reason why is because you play this card, you clear the board, but the next turn they just stack all their Dawn and they swing at you. In Kid's case, they'll swing twice at you. So to get better value out of this card when it comes down, like for example, if you open this card and you kind of want to play into making your opponent have a big board, you have to play somewhat kind of weird to set it up so that this resolves really big by making like these weird trades, and then you have to set a position to where you're comfortable playing this 10 cost Kaido down where you can afford to take damage or something like that. And then another big plus about this is that if they have 2 life left, this kind of threatens game because you'll play this, right? And then next turn, you go into 7 Dawn, so you attach 7 and swing for 12 with leader, and then you burn, and then you swing 12. So it's big damage, and it can really take games in the mirror. If you whoever has more of these also win. So it's a pretty good card. Next, let's go with the 7 cost King. Another really good card. The only thing keeping it from being higher on this list is that it costs 7 and it's -2. The 6 cost King from the structure deck is easier to play on curve, and you have a little more options to play after it. But this is a huge swing if it resolves in full. Having this card come into play is pretty devastating for your opponent. A lot of the best cards in the game are 3 costs and less. For example, in green, Okiku, in red, Zoro, and in general, blockers are generally 3 or less. 7/7 stat line is really strong. But yeah, other than that, it's still pretty good, but again, loses out to the 6 cost King just because I think you can start applying pressure earlier with the 6 cost King. So, next I'll put on this list is Hawkins. The stats are kind of poor, but it's still a solid card. It has a high cost and low stats, but the trigger kind of makes up for it because you get a body for free and then you ramp 1. And so having this random body being able to stack, 5 Dawn on it, swing, and then stack 2 on your leader and swing and then burn it's something to think about. And at worst it's a 1k counter, so even if you don't need the curve, you just counter, and that's where it has its value more than versus like ulti per se. Next solid card on this list would probably be Thunder Bagua. So here, classic 2 cost 4k boost, trigger, ramp 1, no Dawn minus cost, so it's just pretty solid overall. I probably wouldn't play it at something at like 4, but that's just preference. I don't like seeing a lot of this card because you're trying to max out your Dawn value anyway. Plus, it has Borrow Breath. The deck has access to Borrow Breath, which would be 1 cost 4k anyway. So, moving on. The next interesting card on this list would be the Structure Deck Jack. It's very comparable to the Sasaki. The difference is Sasaki is a 2k counter, and the Dawn he gets is rested, and on top of that, it's not instant. While this one gives you it instantly, it only gives it to you once, but it does give it to you active. But that 2k counter is pretty important. But I wouldn't look at you weird if you played this card. I could probably use some more testing in my version of the deck to see if it's worth running. Next card on this list that's pretty good, I'd say Who's Who. If this card had counter value, it'd be broken. Probably don't want to go too many copies on this card, and you don't want to play it on curve. The idea behind this card is to play it later in the game to get rid of those last few blockers so you can kind of swing for game. It's a pretty solid card. It's also got a pretty sacky trigger, but the card is like borderline busted. Next card here would probably be, I'd go ahead and put the Structure Deck Black Maria here. So this card's another 2 cost blocker. It's a little bit worse than the Higurashi just because of the stats, but you kind of need to play the blockers anyway. But if you were going to take one out, this would be the first one you take out. Next solid card would be kind of Borrow Breath. It's pretty unique of its type. 1 cost, 4K power. But the trick is you don't want to use this card too early because it'll set you back on your curve. So I don't like seeing this card too much either. And let's see, the last card I would put on this list, probably Onigashima. You see it, you see it. You don't, you don't. But it lets you do all the degenerate stuff in this deck. Before we go into the absolute essentials of any purple deck, looks like I missed some fluff. This card, no good. It's a slow queen. This card, vanilla, whack. Okay, moving forward. Now, so we'll just go in. This is no particular order, but boom, best blocker in your deck, 2/3. It can swing. Counter +1. Good card. Not really much to say. Ignore Shanks. Shanks isn't super relevant, but yeah, solid blocker. This is gonna be one of your main blockers with Queen. Next, Sasaki. Mainly for the 2K counter. At worst, you play him on field, and it has decent stats. Next, your probably best 2K counter in the deck, Drake. Solid stats if you need to play it. It does have an irrelevant effect. But the game state has to be super simplified for it to matter. Next, the Big Daddy, 9 cost Kaido. Amazing card. Not really much needs to be said. Spot removal, rush. He probably won't die as soon as he comes out on the field. This card will probably see play forever in the life of purple, along with these 2 other cards here. So King, amazing card, almost unfair really. If you go first and have Onigashima on turn 2, then this is live on turn 3, which is kind of crazy because the opponent's turn probably played like their 3 costs, trying to think they can establish board, but they can't. So it becomes a mind game whether or not you have this card or not after you hit the Onigashima. Yeah. Amazing stats. Only negative is it doesn't have a counter value, but that'd be asking for too much. 6 cost 7K is pretty amazing. 7K is pretty hard to block, and you know you're moving problem cards on the field with this guy usually. And the other holy trinity of this Queen, amazing blocker, and the stats are, I don't know why it's so high. 5 costs for 6K, and you know it will block for 8 often since most of your counters are 2K. You want to save this card if you use it as a block just to establish board presence, because once you have it, your next turn you start cracking back with these big guys, and you know it just gets really hard for your opponent to control the board state from there. I hope this tier list for this color was helpful to you, and stay tuned. I'll break down the rest of the cards from the set soon. Thanks for watching.